Welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. This is Voices for Learning, where we help you grow as a voice actor. My name is Susan Fouché. Thank you so much for being here. I have a special guest with me today. His name is Mike Thomas. He is a fellow Nashvilleian, and for over 50 years, he was a producer of radio and television ads and jingles. He is a musician, and he is also an individual who is dyslexic. He has lived with dyslexia his whole life and never really got a whole lot of remediation with it in school at all. He had to figure it all out for himself. So after he retired from the music business and from the production business, he went ahead and started a business where he actually coaches children with dyslexia and their families and how to help those kids. And he also helps adult people with dyslexia. He has written a book called The Successful Dyslexic, and he also coaches. His website is called www.thesuccessfuldyslexic.com if you'd like to learn more information about him. And Mike is here to talk about what he does with his coaching of dyslexic people. And he also wanted to tell you a little bit about what it means for dyslexic people to have voice actors read aloud material. So Mike, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. This is really special. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, very much for having me.
Welcome. So tell us about The Successful Dyslexic.
Well, it was a book that I always wanted to write, and I kept telling myself I was going to write this book someday. And I got to be gray haired and decided that I'd better write the book. If it was going to do any good, I better write it while I was still on this side of the grass. So I got down a few years ago and started actually writing the book. Now, I've been a writer all of my life, but most of my writing was limited to 60 seconds of either a jingle lyric or copy writing or something of that nature, or songs. If I wanted to really stretch myself, to 2.5 minutes. But writing a book is a whole different type of thing. And you know as well as I do that writing isn't about writing, it's about rewriting. So I wrote the book and then I rewrote the book and then I did more research and then I consulted a whole bunch of people, psychologists. I had grown up as a dyslexic, not knowing what dyslexia was, because back in when I was in school, the teachers, nobody ever heard of the word dyslexic. They just thought, well, those kids were either lazy or they were dumb. Now that's the nice way to put it, actually. So back in the late 40s and 50s, when I was in school, and I'm ancient, that's kind of like the year one, teachers never heard of it. It was just something that nobody had any idea about it. And so I didn't know what was the matter with me. I didn't know why I couldn't learn in school. I don't know why everybody else was getting it and I wasn't. But I knew that I was dumb. That was my self-image. I was dumb. And for dyslexics, the problem that we face is that we don't have a whole lot of alternatives if you can't read very well. The first thing that you recognize is the fact that you're scared to death that one of your little friends is going to find out you can't read and they're going to laugh at you. You're going to be embarrassed and humiliated. I remember a particular time in Sunday school class when they were passing the Bible. And it was going to be my turn to read that sentence. And by the time I got the Bible, I was so scared that I just wanted to run out of there. And I tried to read it. I tried to read it as hard as I could, and I stumbled over the words, and I guessed at them, and they were always wrong, and the kids laughed at me. And I was devastated. And the teacher decided, well, maybe I shouldn't ask Mike to read again. So I was never asked to read again, and I swore I'd never read out loud another time in my life. By the time I got to the fourth grade, I couldn't read, and I couldn't move on. I was hitting the wall, as it was. And fortunately, I had a wonderful teacher. They still didn't know what dyslexia was, but she knew that I was struggling. And when I went to enroll in the fifth grade, she called me into her office. She was my fourth grade teacher, and she said, "Mike, you don't know how to read." And I was devastated. I thought I had hid and kept anybody from knowing all of these years, and she knew. But she was one of those teachers. She was that teacher for me who said, "Mike, you need to learn to read, and you need to take the fourth grade over. You can't do fifth grade work." And what happened was, it forced me to recognize. Now, I'd passed fourth grade, and I voluntarily took the fourth grade over. And I determined that I was going to overcome this. I was going to learn to read. I was not going to be a victim. That's very important for dyslexics. You're talking about 20% of the population. That's 1 in 5. 1 in 5 children. You take a classroom with 30 kids, 6 of them are dyslexic to various degrees. And the teachers don't know it. I thought by now, with all of the things I had discovered and I had learned, that teachers would understand all of these things, and they would have applied them, and they would know everything about dyslexia, and it would be a thing of the past. That was 50 years ago. You know, when I was teaching at the UCLA Psychological Clinic School, and I was in college, and I discovered that what I had a name, and it was dyslexia. My degree's in physiological psychology because I wanted to understand what was wrong with me. All psychologists want to figure themselves out first, right? So, you know, it's a challenge when I recognize that my kids were dyslexic and nobody was able to help them. The accommodations that they give to dyslexic kids are, well, we'll give you a little bit more time on the test, or we'll put you over here. They regard you as handicapped or broken or somehow lazy or just not very smart. And for all of what they say, the reality is entirely different. As I was talking to a third grade teacher, she had no idea that the 1 in 5, she didn't think she had ever had any dyslexic kids in her classroom. And she was just knocked out by the fact that, you know, this isn't about girls or boys or black or white or Asian or anything else. It's the world population. And why that is because dyslexics are just part of the population, and we are part of the spectrum. It's a spectrum disorder. And so it can be severe, it can be mild, it can be regarding, you know, numbers, it can be letters and words, because it's a symbol processing disorder. And letters and words and numbers are all symbols for things.
So when did you start being able to figure out how to read?
Well, in the fourth grade. When I took the fourth grade over the second time and decided, first thing was my attitude. I accepted the fact that I had a problem. And we all know the steps. If you're handicapped with anything, or if you have a disorder with anything and you have to overcome it, you have to accept it, you have to analyze it, and you have to make a plan, and you have to execute that plan, and you have to keep it up with hard work. Those are the steps. So I wasn't thinking that, of course, back then, but I recognized that if I started listening better and really tried to focus in on what the teacher was saying and get to try to understand what she was saying. Because some of the teachers would write on the blackboard, and I couldn't figure out what that writing was. It was a scrawl. And by the time I was starting to figure it out here over on the left side of the blackboard where they started, they had finished over on the right, and they started erasing what I was trying to read. and I'm typical. This wasn't just me. This was every single dyslexic you've ever met. And you've met many of them. But what we're really good at doing is hiding, because we don't want to, it's self-defense. We don't want to get embarrassed. We don't want anybody knowing that we're dyslexic, and it becomes a habit. And what we do, if we're lucky, like I was, we learn to compensate. Okay? We learn that just because we have a problem in this area doesn't mean that we don't have talent. Some people are great football stars, or they're great actors, or they're artists, or they're, something else that they can do. I happen to have a love for music and was able to, really focus in on playing the guitar and singing and getting some self-esteem from that, so that I wasn't completely shoved out of the social norm of high school or anything like that. And I was able, little by little, to figure out ways of compensating for my reading and get a little bit better. Now, I don't read 3,000 words a minute. Some kids just, they never think of it. They look at the letters and the words, and it has meaning for them. Dyslexics, we look at letters and words, has no meaning. And I figured out that if I was able to check it out enough, that is, if I ran into a word I'd never seen before and everything, I would try to figure out what it might be in terms of the context of the sentence or the everything else, and I would guess at it. And sometimes I was right, and most times I was wrong. But eventually, I was able to figure out that this word looked different than that word. They looked the same to me when I first looked at them. But if I focused in on the critical difference between one word or a letter and another word, see, the problem for dyslexics is that when we look at either numbers or anything, they vibrate and they move. They are not static. They wave. They float. Black on white is like a planet in space. It has no background. It's there, but it's moving, and so it's hard for us to figure out what it is. But if I can hear it in my head, if I can say it out loud, then it has meaning. Then I know what it means. But I don't trust my eyes because the stuff is moving. And this is a struggle. And little tiny increments about, first I had to get over my fears. And then I had to learn how I learned as a dyslexic, because I didn't learn the same way the other kids did. I had to go about it completely differently, because when the teachers taught me the traditional way, it just didn't work. So I was stuck there. Now, I was fortunate in that I had a very loving and supporting family, and they tried everything. And eventually I was able to get a little bit better. I was able to figure it out because I looked at the big picture and the ideas. And I learned the ideas. Now, I might not know all of the details, not a detailed person, but the big ideas, that was something I could grasp onto and figure out. And I could really work on that. And I was good at that. But you take the kid that doesn't have a whole lot of talents, and what happens to him? A lot of them drop out of school at the very first thing, or they become the bully. You know that little kid in the 5th grade that beats everybody up and he pulls the girl's hair? That was one of those kids that was covering up the fact that he couldn't read, or he couldn't do things very, very well. And he thought he was dumb. The teacher thought he was dumb. He said, I don't need no stinking education. I'll just be a bully and I'll distract them from anything academically, and I'll go sell drugs on the street corner. But back then it wasn't drugs. It was just, but they wind up in juvenile court and later in prison. So you look at the kids that drop out and become a sack boy at the grocery store, and I did sack groceries for a time, and other kids actually take their lives. They get so depressed. We're talking about a spectrum on the autism spectrum, and the autism spectrum is very, very large. And when I was at UCLA, they used to describe it for all practical purposes. This is not scientifically, technically correct, because now we have know so much more research-wise. But they would just simplify it down and say, dyslexics are kind of in this middle of the autism spectrum, where you got ADHD at one end, the kids that are easily distracted, and you got the severe autistic kids at the other end. And everything kind of in between can be varying degrees of severity of dyslexia. And that is, well, for instance, and with my kids, I had one child that was more, they call it dysgraphia now, with numbers and a problem, and then one that had problems more like me with letters and things. That it was really challenging, to say the least, because dyslexia is a very broad, general term to describe this spectrum. It's not a specific set of little, things that you can address specifically. It varies with every single dyslexic. We're all different. And so it makes it very hard to figure out who is or who isn't, especially for teachers. So it's not their fault. They aren't taught to deal with dyslexic kids. They're taught how to deal with the other 4 out of 5 that's quote, quote, normal. And they're taught traditional teaching methods. That is, they are taught to just teach as if everybody was normal. There was no such thing as dyslexia. And the problem is that just leaves kids like me sitting not being taught, because we learn differently and they don't know it. So what do we do? Now, I was really fortunate. I grew up in the late 40s and early 50s when there was radio and there was no television. And I listened to Big John and Sparky, and I listened to Sergeant Preston of the Yukon on Saturday morning radio. I know that sounds impossible, but the same things on TV were in radio before they went to television, you know? And so I would sit there and I would listen to all of these radio shows on Saturday morning. And at night I would listen to Fibber McGee and Molly and The Shadow Knows, you know. And the wonderful thing about it was when you listen as a dyslexic, the world opens up. Those people, the actors, never knew what gifts they were giving to the dyslexic kids like me. They had no idea that we even existed. They were just doing their jobs. But without that, without voiceover people like yourself, I would have been lost. To this day, a lot of my education comes from listening to books on tape or, books on CD now. That I can download those, and I have gone through the classics. I've gone through all of I love mystery novels, but I love the Harry Potter series. The guy that reads that is one of the finest actors, voiceover actors that ever lived. Dick Hill is another one. It's great voice, great acting. There's so many of them. The Michael Connelly series is a wonderful. And for me, that's like going back to the old radio days when my kids and I would be in the car. I would go to Cracker Barrel and I would get the old radio shows and I would play them for them, and Sherlock Holmes with Razzle Batbone. It wasn't Razzle Batbone. It was Basil Rathbone. But I always reversed it just for the fun of it, and Nigel Bruce. They were, in the movies, they were the Holmes and, Watson characters. But they also did the audio radio shows before that. And so they were great. And I would put those on while we were traveling. And I've always put, books on tape, while I was traveling. Because that way I could learn. I could learn auditorily. And if I heard it, I remembered it. If I saw it, I didn't remember it at all. But, you were talking about, the gifts that have been given by great actors. I've had the privilege over the last 50 years of working with some of the finest voiceover people in Nashville and in LA and all over the place. When I was doing jingles and I wrote copy for Saturday Evening Post and everything else. I mean, I've done a lot of different things in that regard. I've done many, many national jingles, radio, TV, and I've gotten to work with the voiceover people that were doing the spots. I've even done some voiceover myself. Although I'm probably much better at directing than I am at doing. But here again, if they want a really quirky, odd voice, then they might pick me. So, I try to do that. But, we were speaking of, and some people that are watching may know, remember Dan Miller, WKY television. He did the news and he was one of the most incredible readers that I ever worked with. I would do narrations for PR presentations, might be a slideshow for the different public relations companies around town. And quite often they would be 20, 25, 30 minutes in length. I remember one particularly that Dan and I went over Spotland, and it was Betty and Jean. And Jean passed, but it was great because I gave him the script, and he took 5 minutes and he read it, and he read it a second time, and then said, okay. And he sat down there and read that entire script with one time that he stopped to drink a glass of water. And there wasn't anything I could say but thank you. Because he didn't make any mistakes. None. All of the inflections, all of the delivery was absolutely perfect. I mean, you talk about a one-take wonder. And we did that, and then one year I had done the Gillette commercial for Ollie and Sphinx rematch, and then it went on to the NFL playoffs and the Super Bowl, and Dan did all of the voiceovers for that spot, that we were doing. So I did have a Super Bowl commercial. That's the pinnacle. If you're wondering about jingles, the pinnacle is the Super Bowl. Say, yeah. and I was lucky enough to do a lot of those kinds of things back in the day, and when you had a lot of jingles being done here. But the great thing about it is, in spite of being dyslexic, I was able to, for instance, when I was going to college, I was going to go into college. My mother thought, well, I don't know if Mike is smart enough to get into college and actually not flunk out. So she had my IQ tested, and the guy said, well, he's fine. He just has a little reading problem. So I went and took 3 speed reading courses to try to boost my reading skills. And I didn't read any faster, but what I did, I learned that you don't read everything the same way. Now, everybody knows that, except I didn't know that. I didn't know a lot of things. I got into college, and I discovered things were moving when I got a highlighter, a yellow highlighter, that just come out. They were just invented. 1963, and I would mark stuff in my book with that yellow highlighter, and all of a sudden I could read it because the text, the black print, was nailed to a background and it stopped moving. And so I was, and later on they confirmed that with studies done with different colored filters. Okay. And there's a lot of scientific things behind, being dyslexic. I don't know if you're aware, but normal kids, the 4 out of 5, learn their reading centers right here. That's where you learn to read. Not dyslexics. We learn to read right here. And we learn to read differently because we have this symbol processing disorder, but we're trying to function through this. Now, the good part of that, it's right next to the creative center. And you look at the people that are dyslexic, and many of them are super creative. Okay? The one thing about dyslexics is because we're big picture people, we make giant leaps of logic. And we have that ability to imagine the whole thing. Steven Spielberg is dyslexic. Okay? He envisions a whole movie. Walt Disney was dyslexic. he envisioned Mickey Mouse. I mean, these are big picture people that can imagine Disneyland or Disney World. Winston Churchill was dyslexic, and he could hear a whole speech in his head and then just say it out loud. He didn't have to read it because he had it in his head of what he wanted to say. He would say it to his secretary so she could write it down and print it up for the newspapers that would want to print his speech. And that's the way he dealt with that. You have Steve Jobs, one of the most creative, imaginative people in the world, imagined all of those things like the iPhone and everything, and all of the Apple products, everything.
I read that Charles Schwab is also dyslexic.
Is he? Is he? That doesn't
Yes.
surprise me. But see, here again, he's a leader. He is
Right.
a big picture person.
Right.
You
And
know.
the guy that is Virgin Airlines, I think it's
Uh huh. Yeah.
Steve Bannon.
No, it's um, not Bannon. Branson.
Branson, thank
Branson.
you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And he is dyslexic. Um, and Albert Einstein was dyslexic.
Wow.
I mean, you talk about giant leaps in logic. He could envision things that nobody had ever dreamed of.
Mhm.
And that's the way our brains work, is we look at all of the ideas and we compare them, and because that is what we're searching for, is meaning. We're searching for that big picture. And every kid that's dyslexic has that gift. They have a section of MI5 over in England that is dedicated to code breaking, and they hire a whole section of dyslexic people because they can see how to break codes when nobody else can.
Right.
And they do it very deliberately.
Right.
So we are not worthless. We are good kids. And the thing about it is, I wrote the book, and I did so because I wanted to teach the three groups that needed it most, and that is adult dyslexics. Quite a few of them have no idea they're still struggling, but a lot of them are I want to teach the families, and I've taught the families of small dyslexics like I was in the fourth grade, who are hitting that wall. I have one family right now that the child was just kicking and screaming and acting out, doing anything to not read, not learn, not go to school, distract from the fact that he couldn't read. He's 10 years old and he reads on a kindergarten level. And we've been going through and having weekly sessions, and now the bad behavior has calmed down, and he went to his mother and he asked her if she would teach him to read. And she was practically in tears because this was more than she had dreamed about. But it was because we dealt with the trauma first and then have eased into the learning how to learn section. Okay, and then we'll go on to mastering skills after that. But it's the people that need it most are not dyslexic. The people that need it most are the teachers that teach and that don't realize that the dyslexic kid is being ignored and that they aren't getting to this kid. So I have now, I'm doing 3 classes online that will launch very soon. I'm pre-recording the lessons so that it can be self-paced. And I'm doing one for teachers exclusively, that they can come in as a group or whatever, and they can take the course individually. They can go through it, and then I will do live Q&As monthly to answer questions, and of course answer all the questions. We'll have a Facebook group and all of those things so that they can get an understanding of this, because they really weren't taught this. And the fact is that scientific research has proved that dyslexics cannot learn from traditional teaching methods. You know, a teacher can change how she teaches, but a dyslexic kid cannot change the way we learn. We're just built that way, you know, and so many of us, and to this day, one of the greatest things that I have is the love of reading books, the love of books. And I have to spend my time studying some things. But when I want to enjoy a good book, I put it on and I listen to it with the greatest actors in the world that can, like yourself, that can turn that into magic and imagination.
Well, I had the privilege of recording the introduction or the preface to your book, The Successful Dyslexic. And, you know, I am the mother of a dyslexic child. Well, he's 19, but he's still my baby. But I mean, I remember, you know, those days of, you know, just like you said, the trauma of, you know, just dealing with it. Could you kind of just talk about that, just the trauma that families face?
Oh, it's incredible. It is incredible, and I didn't know. And you know, back when I was a kid, my family didn't know. I had three older brothers, and they all read beautifully, and they didn't know what was wrong with me. They just thought I was dumb. And the big problem is that the mother and the father, they think their child is dumb, and they squash that down. They can't face that. It's so painful that they blame themselves. I was teaching a family in Canada, and after the very first lesson that I taught with them, they had a third grade kid who is dyslexic. And I asked the mother after the session, I said, what did you learn out of this? And she said, I learned it wasn't my fault. And it struck me, it almost brought me to tears, because I was thinking about the fact that this kid is so isolated and alone because he thinks he's dumb, and he thinks nobody understands him, and he's right. He's right that nobody understands him. He's wrong that he's dumb. Dyslexics are generally probably higher IQ than their peers, but we have this poor self-image. But the mother blamed herself, and she was so caught up in her distress and her trauma that she didn't realize she didn't have any attention to give to her son. She couldn't help him. And the one thing about that was when she was able to let go of blaming herself. I mean, this gulf between the two of them, when she got rid of her guilt, she was able to come together and support him. And when she supported him, he was able to feel that, and he was able to let go of some of his negative feelings towards himself, and he was able to start to change. And for a dyslexic to start change, the first thing we have to do is realize that learning is a function of attention. Without attention, you know, there is no learning, because we have to be able to focus in on it. and high quality attention equals high quality learning.
So that's kind of sounds like we're like, like we're kind of like voice actors come in, I mean, making a book come alive, doing something that a child or a person with dyslexia cannot do. They cannot focus on the words. And so opening that world and opening that knowledge is just something really special.
But that's really special because you help us focus. When I hear a book, when I hear you talk, I can focus in on that because I get inside that world. When I would listen to The Shadow Knows, I could see every bit of it. It was like watching a movie. And then I can focus. And it helps me learn how to focus. Because focusing is a matter of being able to shut out all of the outside stimuli, the noise that comes into you and everything else, and just be in that bubble. Get in the zone. You know, a basketball player when he's taking a 3-point shot, a golfer when he's hitting that 3-wood. All of them are in the zone. Without focus and attention, they can't hit the ball, they can't hit the 3-point shot. But for them, they know how to do that really, really well. But we don't. And the voiceover people helping us focus and helping us shut out the noise. When I was writing a jingle, I used to go up to Shoney's and I would sit there and write the jingle because there was so much noise, I could close it out. Then I could focus. That sounds, counterintuitive, but it really, sometimes that's what it takes in order to focus. Mm-hmm. And a lot of kids, for instance, I was never very good in the library because the slightest little noise would distract me, whereas a cacophony would not. But, these are things that I discovered and I put it in the book. I put it in, I made a note of that.
Well, I appreciate you writing this book, and I personally appreciate everything you do for people with dyslexia and their families and adults with dyslexia and teachers too. I mean, I can't thank you enough for doing this. There's not enough out there. I mean, I can tell you my son got zero remediation in school when he was in elementary school all the way through high school. And everything that he did was, we had to shell out lots and lots of money. I mean, it was like it cost as much as like private school tuition. And we put him in public school because that's like the only way that we could deal with it, because the private school was not addressing it. They were sending him to a classroom just by himself. I mean, like you talk about, he was completely isolated, always isolated. And then, the things that were said to me personally that were so hurtful by the teachers. I mean, just I would just think like, I can't even imagine somebody accusing me of this, but I mean, they would say terrible things to me. And, being a young mother, I I don't know, I really did look at it like, well, this is my fault. They're right. It is my fault. I am not doing enough. And, come to find out, it's just, they didn't know what they were doing. I didn't know what I was doing. Fortunately, I did find a program that helped wonderfully. And I think what helped him is just realizing that he was smart and having some successes and just building upon those successes. But I mean, I can tell you, starting really like in second grade, um, you know, there was a piece of him that died.
Yeah.
Because of what he went through, and reading that, the foreword to your book, the letter to the teacher, there was a part where, I read out loud, that smile is gone. And it was so true. It's so true. So I really appreciate, what you're doing. And for those of you who are wondering how you can learn more, the successfuldyslexic.com is the website that you'll need to go to. And Mike does teaching. He does teaching through Zoom. He can help you and your family. Just get in contact with him through that, and I'll have that in the notes, in the description, the successfuldyslexic.com. And the name of his book is The Successful Dyslexic, and you can buy that on Amazon. Go there, please read it. I think you'll find so much information. If you are a mother or father, your child is dyslexic, if you are dyslexic yourself, please take a look at that. And Mike, are there any other resources that you would recommend for people with dyslexia?
Yeah. First of all, I want to say the word successful, when I use it in this context, is about the self-esteem issue. That is, for a dyslexic to get past that negative self-image. When we can do that and we can become functional and we can be happy with ourselves, that's the successful dyslexic. So, yes, all of the things. And look, my book is about starting at the basics. That is the beginning. All of the resources out there in terms of learning centers and other places are really take place after you go through my book. Okay? Because I wanted to address what was not being addressed by the learning centers. A lot of people, Orton Gillingham, they're wonderful. Okay? All of the brain games and the learning centers that do all of those things, that's wonderful. I don't have any problems with anything. One of the greatest assets that I was given was taking lessons. When I was 6 years old, I was in tap dancing class with my brothers, and I could do a really mean ball on the jack. Just that's going back a whole long. That's a dance, got by the tap dancing. Anyway, all of those things, little things, whether it's taking lessons for piano or art or anything else, are ways to find your talent and to compensate. And remember, dyslexics only have three alternatives. You either learn to compensate, or you drop out, or you rebel. And two of the three are really bad. So learning to compensate was what I was trying to cover in the book. And I was trying to help families get a basis, a foundation, a way to go about helping this child learn. I had a girl a mother in Italy wrote me, and her daughter's been dyslexic all of her life and struggled and everything. And she said she got a hold of my book somehow, and that it meant so much to her that she translated it into Italian and used it as part of her thesis presentation at the University of Pisa. And I was just so humbled by the fact that I had spoken to her through this book, and we had shared something that broke through that isolation. And these are the kinds of things that all dyslexics need throughout their lives, not just as children, but especially as children, but even the adult dyslexics. We need more and more of this type of thing. And I hope, when the audio book comes out, I had a guy write me the other day, said he was looking for the audio book and he couldn't find it, but he went ahead and read my book on Kindle online. And he said it meant so much to him that somebody finally understood what he went through. And he shared it with his wife, and she finally understood what he was going through. And they are closer together today than they ever have been.
That's wonderful.
That's gratifying for me. I said it when I started writing it. I said, if I can help one kid, it'll all be worth it.
Well, it
And
sounds
that
like you've helped more than one kid.
well,
Thank
I'm
you so much.
thank
Thank you.
you. I appreciate it. And yeah, I look forward to working with you more on voiceovers as well.
Yeah, me too. Thank you. And I appreciate you hiring me or, getting me to
Yeah,
do that letter to the teacher in your book. It was a privilege. It was I talked to my husband about it and I said, well, I just did that. And I said that really dredged up a lot of memories. And we kind of talked about some different teachers and had our little, I guess, like walk down sad memory lane.
yeah,
Remember that one teacher and remember this one time that one happened. And so I appreciate you writing it, and I think it is so helpful. And just I appreciate your knowledge and all the work that you do with kids and with families. It's so important. And thank you for letting the audience know that as a voice actor, it what they do is important. It's not just like, oh, you're an actor. It really is. No, you open the world for people who cannot read. You
that's right.
open the world for people who have a learning disability. And that is a wonderful special thing. So Mike, I really appreciate it. So Mike's book is called The Successful Dyslexic. You can buy it on Amazon, and the audiobook is coming out soon. We're working on the production of it. And the website is thesuccessfuldyslexic.com. Please check that out too, and contact Mike if you would like any more information about him teaching you or your family, getting to just the basics of how to deal with your child who has dyslexia, or how to deal with how to go back in your life as a dyslexic adult. Um, so Mike, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time
Thank you,
out to
Susan.
do
I
this.
really appreciate you having me on and giving me a platform to talk about this.
Yeah, it was an honor. It was an honor. Those of you who want to know more about how you can also help people with learning disability and reading, um, libvox.org, libvox.org, is always looking for people to volunteer. They help a lot of people who have dyslexia and other reading disabilities. And also there is learningally.org. And I know a lot of people have gotten their start as voice actors by reading textbooks with learningally.org. That's a great place to go to just practice and to just get your start and to volunteer your time. It's a wonderful organization. People with dyslexia need their world opened up, and they need to hear uh, words being spoken. They are auditory learners. And so to have textbooks and other learning materials read to them is just absolutely very important. So thank you so much for being with me today. And I just, appreciate you listening and listening to Mike, and be sure and check out his book. You can also like and subscribe to my channel. I would appreciate that. If you have any questions for me, please leave them in the comments and I'll be sure to answer. Have a great day. Just keep going. You're doing great. You're doing wonderful. Have a good day. Bye.